Total unity.
Beyond the beyonds. That's how Seamus Heaney described the talent of John Kingerlee, an artist inspired by the forces of nature, nature both benign and destructive. I first came across his work in 2006 when, as an arts journalist, I reviewed Jonathan Bennington's gloriously illustrated biography. I was captivated by the images. Given the right stimulus, the human imagination is boundless. As I see it, Kingerlee's talent lies in providing exactly that kind of stimulation. It wasn't until 2 years later, in 2008, on another assignment, this time in Beijing, that I became aware of his global appeal. Now, here's a question for you. How big a workforce would you need to hang a Kingerlee painting on a gallery wall? At the National Art Museum of China, they take such things very seriously, so the answer is 30. That's 30. Led by an elite team of 4 highly trained, Armani-suited young men using a level with the precision of surgeons with scalpels. The event was the first solo show by an artist from the British Isles at China's most prestigious art museum. It was the grandest of grand occasions, the formal opening ceremony ending with a phalanx of VIPs stepping forward to cut the red ribbon in unison. Only then did the assembly move through to the gallery to see a genre of art that until very recent times was denied to the Chinese: abstraction. The crowd was mostly young and the atmosphere was electric. All that was missing was the artist himself. He, of course, was back in the wilds of West Cork, pouring his heart and soul into the grids, portraits and collages, destined for collectors and galleries all round the world. Watching him at work is exhilarating. He stipples, he stabs, he pounds with the thick end of a decorating brush, using swift strokes of a palette knife to form a raised and richly textured surface. His palette reflects the cycle of time, greens and blues providing a pastoral mood, fiery yellows and bloody reds hinting at urban chaos. His chosen genre is abstraction, not the easier genre. If when people look at a painting they can't immediately see what the artist's intention was, it can make them feel inadequate. What the artist intended doesn't really matter. What does is, what does the painting say to you? Abstraction isn't new. It has just taken mankind a long time to get round to it. What else was the Big Bang, if not the ultimate piece of abstract art? Kingerlee was born in Birmingham, a direct descendant of another artistic talent, Josiah Wedgwood. Early on, the family moved to London, where his father managed a gentleman's poker club, and one of the celebrity customers was Douglas Fairbanks Jr. The movie star's girlfriend was Kingerlee's Aunt Anna, who trained horses for circuses coming through London. The couple planned to adopt John, but war broke out, and Fairbanks returned to Hollywood. When John left school, he worked in a bicycle factory and as a gardener in a special needs Rudolf Steiner school before heading to London, where he felt instantly happy in Soho's artistic community. In 1958, he married Mo. He had an ambition to write, and in fact, he did write a little book for children. But when his own children came along, he found he couldn't concentrate. Then in 1962, he picked up a paintbrush and found his true métier, By then, London was swinging. John's off-the-wall images captured the zeitgeist, and before very long, his paintings were selling to high-profile collectors, people such as film director Stanley Donen, Leslie Caron, Richard Harris. The bad news was that he wasn't actually making a living. By 1974, things were so bad, he gave up painting altogether and moved the whole family, lock, stock and barrel, down to Cornwall. Every Saturday, John would fill a sack with his little pots, hitchhike to London and sell them in a street market for a pittance. By 1981, he was becoming increasingly disillusioned with the growing materialism of British society. Living in Cornwall had given him a taste for the ocean, and it was a walking holiday to Dingle in County Kerry that inspired him to paint again and prompted the couple's move to Ireland.
I was always drawn to Ireland, and when I got here, I actually loved the place and the people. So then came a desire to come and live here, and that's eventually what we did. A writer who lives on the other side of a mountain told us of a little house that we could rent, and so we came to the house, rented it.
The setting was magical. But the house at the end of a steep track, unnegotiable by car, was exactly as it had been when abandoned heaven knows how many decades ago. It had no electricity, no bathroom, no telephone, so for 5 long years self-sufficiency was the watchword. In 1987, the couple moved to a more comfortable accommodation and built John's first dedicated studio, a place where he could paint. Slowly, the paintings began to be exhibited and sold in Dublin, Belfast and New York, where they caught the eye of William Zimmer, art critic for the New York Times. So impressed was he turned up on Kingerlee's doorstep.
I think he is private to some extent, but then all artists are. So if they met, let's say, in a cafe, Van Gogh, and you know, they have a drink and then they talk and then they fall silent and maybe get out their sketchbooks. But yes, he behaves like an artist of the past. He's the 19th century. And I think it's important to go back to that because we lost it. We lost the touch, the personal contact with things in art. It's always reassuring when you see that somebody's painting what's around him. And he paints what's around him and then he paints what's here and they sort of merge. And then his different styles, and he works in different ways simultaneously. So he keeps you moving, and you have to be alert too. And you know, you're never lulled into complacency with him. Anything in the universe can come into these paintings.
The next distinguished visitor was Dr. Edmund Pillsbury, one-time director of the Yale Centre for British Art and director of the Kimball Museum, a man whose discerning eye has earned him a global reputation. As one art professional put it, when Dr. Ted walks into a room, everyone stands up.
I had the good fortune 4 or 5 years ago to receive an invitation to a home. I went there to look at a work of art, and it was an interesting work of art, but at this home, there were 2 rooms with paintings by John Kingerlee, and I feasted my eyes. I went from one picture to the next, and I couldn't believe the richness and the originality, the talent of this artist that I'd never heard of before. And my interest and curiosity were whetted, and I tracked down other paintings by him, and I couldn't resist the invitation to come to Ireland, such a beautiful country, to meet this artist and to see more of his work.
What was it that's so special, looking at the paintings? What was it that caught your eye?
Well, I think it was the special texture. The paint was built up in a way. It had a sense of relief and a subtlety of application and surface and a palette that was both so expressive but yet so limited.
Yes.
And there was so much meaning packed into these small panels by John Kingerlee. I hadn't seen painting of this quality in years, and I have a great respect for some of the great painters. I worked at the British Art Centre at Yale, which was a great collection of British art. I love the paintings of Turner. I've come to admire also the work of Frank Auerbach and Lucian Freud, certainly Francis Bacon, but I thought here was an artist that was the true successor to Turner in terms of a British artist who understood paint, and who was using it in the most expressive and original way.
Despite his affinity with West Cork and the inspiration it provides, he is drawn to a very different world on the continent of Africa. His interest was sparked by his friendship in London with 3 Sufis, men he describes as the wisest he has ever encountered. In 1976, he made his first visit to Morocco. He stayed for 10 days, but as he recalls, it seemed like a lifetime. Since then, he has returned every year, and in 1988, he converted to Islam. What holds him enthralled is the spontaneity of life in those crowded alleyways and the people who inhabit them.
The way people will smile at you in the street. I like the way direct hassle people will give you. You have to deal with the situation. I like the way you have to learn about money and handle it and negotiate for the price of a thing. I like the way they bury their own dead and bring their own children into the world. A lot of this has been taken away from us. So we're impotent in leading our own lives. They bury their dead, they bring their children into the world. They look after each other. A rich country full of poor people. Everything that the painter sees affects him, or the artist sees affects him one way or the other. And sometimes you can see 2 people in the street doing something or something going on, and it's just gigantic in the imagination. And I certainly feel stronger colours coming on if I live longer in Africa. Though at the same time I know I'm going to go on painting with a lot of white for a long time, inshallah. It just goes on and on and on. When you look at it, it's got such depth, white and off-white, shades of white. It has an incredible depth. And in certain states of being, it almost seems to move and shimmer in front of your eyes. That's lovely. Here you learn more and more you're just another human being, and one brushes up against the rest of humanity in a way that makes one a human being. In Europe, it's so easy to get so isolated and lonely. Here, you don't get lonely. There's always someone intruding and coming at you, which has a great humility about it.
William Zimmer had described Kingerlee's paintings as spare and elegant, invocations of emotions that are amplified in the mind of the careful observer. Paradoxically, he said, these small works are quite large. They evoke sensations that take you beyond the borders of the picture frames. Eager to see work in progress, he visited Kingerlee in Tangier.
By accident, I found, again last night when I wrapped this up, that begins to work very nicely here. It's almost like the rocks are the bearers with this.
Art has a lot of mystique around it, and it's deliberately cultivates that. How much is, God-given? How much is me? How much is speaking through me? So, and John plays with that. You don't know, because he talks about it coming from somewhere else, but then he's very carefully doing it. The kind of paper, the texture, the color. He's sort of guiding every moment.
the really mindful bit, the conscious bit, is suddenly recognizing something that's good, something that's worthwhile, even though it quite arrived at by an accident. The piece says, it's me, it's me, it's me, and you just do it. You move it. It's almost as though it talks to you, commands you. That's the really good part. So one's usual ego disappears. And what's nicer than getting away from oneself? That's one of the joyful aspects of being an artist, writing a book, painting a picture, composing music. It's you get away from your everyday self. That vanishes. Almost the whole world vanishes. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. The big problem is always oneself in life.
Nowhere is John Kingerlee more valued than in the home of Gerald and Ginna Landcourt. The couple are avid collectors, quick to sing the praises of the man they think of as their artistic guru. There are Kingerlee paintings all over the house.
We're going into my Kingerlee hall here. We have most of our Kingerlees here, and also in the bedrooms. The first thing when I get up in the morning, I see the creation Kingerlee. And you really have to study these pictures for several hours because, you know, it's called the landscape, but it's not. It's the earth. It's creation. There's the inner part of the earth. And there are people around looking at someone's leaving, but someone's staring and looking. There's someone looking there. This is fire and sun. And, you know, I've heard someone describe it as Dante's Inferno, but it's not Dante's Inferno because there's nothing unpleasant about this. This is just the mystical aspects of the earth and creation and what we're looking, where we come from and how we relate to it. I can look inside Kingerlee's mind when I see this picture. I think that this, to me, is the greatest Kingerlee. I think we're very lucky to have it. I almost think that it's other people need to see this picture. It's so great, but I'm very happy to have it because to me, it's called a landscape, but that's really not what it is. This is creation. This marries his mystical and his religious, and all this is the earth. This is the Big Bang. That's creation, and there's Adam and Eve, and he marries the religious, the metaphysical, and this is the world. This is the creation of the world. Well, the amazing thing to me is how long you have to study these pictures. I mean, I've been looking at pictures my whole life, and you know, you look at the great ones, and you look for a few minutes. I know some of the big art critics look for hours, but these are the first pictures that I can really look at for hours. Yes. And I can study them, and every time I see them, I see something different. And I can tell from looking at this picture that he is an intensely religious man and also deeply into the metaphysics of nature.
For the paintings, his signature motif is the grid. Now, the grid's a concept that goes back millennia to the very first cities of the ancient Indus civilization. The concept's still with us today. Who hasn't tramped the most famous grid in the world? The streets of Manhattan? John sees each of the divisions as separate paintings, like islands stacked in the sea, a metaphor for, on the one hand, solitude, and on the other, community. The grids were inspired by Ireland's most iconic location, the Hill of Tara.
I remember doing grids on paper, driving to Tara, Mo driving the car, and me drawing all the way, and getting to the seat of the High King of Ireland, and somehow the grid's locking in with this experience. Well, each one of the blocks in the grid is a picture in itself, isn't it? And one's coping with that. There can be 20 landscapes or 10, how many plaques there are. Each one can be a picture in itself. All the mistakes, efforts, achievements, the burials, it all finally rests on the top. Yeah, there's a lot lying beneath, simply because there's lots and lots of layers and lots of time. Surely that increases the whole thing in meaning and pleasure.
Tara, I think, actually means sanctuary, and in a certain sense I think John's work offers sanctuary as well. I think if one were to actually elevate and rise 500 feet into the air and look down on all the undulations, the gradients of this site, it would be like looking down at a John Kingerlee grid painting. The fact that they're so layered, you see, I mean, in a grid there might be up to 100 layers of paint. So there is a kind of archaeology there, and you know, it's absolutely amazing to come here, and I can totally see why John was so inspired by this site, the history of it, the archaeology of it, the geology of it, and actually when you run a hand over a grid painting, you explore it with your eye. You know, properly. You have to spend time with these paintings. You just cannot take them in at a quick glance. That's not how these paintings function.
I love it when people start telling me about my own paintings and show me things I hadn't seen in them. That's wonderful. That gives the whole experience a richness for them and me. I love it when other people join in the creation of it by seeing their own picture. I mean, that's marvellous. We're all artists then.
What advice would you give to a young artist?
Work as much as you can. Keep away from people who sap your energies, and work, work, work. And from my purposes, work on as many things as you can at the same time so you don't get ego bound. But that might not be right for you. It's right for me. Keep good company, I'd say. Keep good company. Keep the company of intelligent, creative people.
In 2016, to celebrate Kingerlee's 80th birthday, Luan Gallery in Athlone held a retrospective of his work. Comprising works spanning his whole career, it was opened by another distinguished collector, Dr. Michael Jackson.
What appealed to me about them, I suppose, was their openness, their honesty, the fact that you needed to grapple with them in order to make sense with them, and I quite enjoyed that. And I suppose I could see that continue and develop as his work got deeper and deeper, and I tried to understand it a bit more. Quite quickly you can discern an honesty of engagement, an integrity of expression, and a desire to give and to share with other people. Something which is a skill, but at the same time enables other people to be enriched in their understanding.
I had the good fortune to be advised about 5 or 6 years ago to take a look at some of his paintings, and I ended up buying one. It was called Land Sea Composition 2001, and it was a wonderful evocation, I think, of sand and sea and stone and shell and sky, and it kind of brought me offshore and looking back on the landscape, and I just find it endlessly fascinating, all that layered texture. And also the fact, I suppose, that my mother comes from Beara predisposed me to liking this and to wanting to appreciate this man's work. You see different things in a Kingerlee painting, I think, every time you look at it. It's almost like going for a walk on a beach. You never have the same walk twice because you get different insights, you get different perspectives, you get different moods and feelings from it. And I just think it's endlessly fascinating.
Well, I think one thing I would have to say is that I would regard him as an artistic genius. And how I would put, I suppose, some flesh on that, I would see him as somebody who was a poet with colours, somebody who ad-libbed in a way with movement, with density, and with that level of creativity. I think his painting asks questions not only of pleasure and delight, but also of justice, of ecology, and from my perspective, of theology.
There, what about that then? I think that's coming on nice, that.
Now, your latest project is the Shricks.
Shricks.
Now, what is a very odd name for a painting? What is Shrick mean?
It's the first letter of the surname of 3 different artists. The first artist is Schwitters, whom I admire immensely and have such an affection for. I'd like to stand with him after Braque. And then Rauschenberg, the young Robert Rauschenberg. And then E is to join me to them, Kingerlee.
What are they? Are they collages? Are they paintings? Are they?
They kick off with their collage and then they get acrylic paint on them and drawing. They're bits and pieces out of my life from over 20 years old and older than that, yes. They get stuck down and they get marked and painted and just evolve slowly until they reach.
So they're kind of organic?
Yes, in that sense, yes. I'm very much not imposing myself over them and doing it in an afternoon. It's all coming together. It's all coming together slowly. And as I think about it, we often are several different people in the same day. And it's nice to get rid of all these bits and pieces that have been hanging around, bus tickets from when one was a kid and such like, and get them all fixed. And my wife told me, looking around at all the bits and pieces, if you live to 120, you won't bloody well finish all this stuff. So I've accepted the challenge. The existence is a miracle. To be here is a miracle. That there's anything at all is a miracle. Let alone the generosity of having arms, legs, eyes, ears, all these senses, and a faculty of consciousness. To be conscious, what a staggering fact that is, to be conscious. And to know that all this is on loan, and that consciousness itself is what? Our most lofty gift. And then to move from that to realize that there is an all-conscious being way beyond us, and that it has given us a little portion of this divine gift, consciousness. That can lead one to the sense that life is a miracle. To be here in creation, creation is a miracle. If I could communicate a portion of my own sense of the miraculous, of being here is a miracle, I'll have surely done a good portion of what I can do as a human being who is an artist. And surely if I can do that, the Creator will be pleased with me.